All right, I think we can slowly kick things off. So first of all, I would like to give you a little bit more idea of the topics that we would like to cover today. So we first would like to talk about Charted, who we are, and also the Catalyst briefly, and about our partnerships. And then the main topics we would like to cover today will be around the accuracy myth and how the actual invoice AI processing should look like inside NetSuite. And also, we would like to have a little bit of a conversation like how to measure the real AP efficiency. Actually, what are the things that we should be really looking at to really understand the efficiency and the ROI, and also how this whole AP process fits natively inside NetSuite. And also during this webinar, also wait for a live demo as well. And then, of course, towards the end, we'll also cover your questions. So my name is Enes, and I work as a senior manager, and I'm heading our solution consulting and delivery here in EMEA. I've been in the NetSuite space for about 7 years and spent like 5 years in AP. And I also have my colleague Mike and Rob from Catalyst today. So, guys, would you like to also have a short introduction about yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Mike Johnson. I'm one of our product managers here at Charted, focused on our Invoice AI solution, which is what we're going to be covering on the call here today. Been with Charted for about 5 years now. Have some experience in the NetSuite ecosystem as an end user before that. I'm excited to be here today and review some of our solutions today with you all. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rob Scambler, ERP Sales Director at Catalyst. Obviously, we're a solution provider, and I'll introduce you to Catalyst in a second. But most of you will know us anyway, hopefully. I've been with Catalyst now for 5 years. I was with NetSuite directly before that for 5 years. So, and really delighted about our partnership with Chartered here, and excited to show you guys what these guys can do.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Rob and Mike. So maybe before we dive into the topics today, I would like to give a little bit of context on like who we are at Chartered and then what we do. So Chartered is a NetSuite SDN partner, and we are in the market for 10 years already. And our focus is purely on the NetSuite ecosystem and the native AP automation. So what that practically means is that we cover the pretty much all the pieces of AP automation here, from vendor onboarding to invoice AI, invoice extraction, invoice OCR, and the approval automation and accruals all managed in one place inside NetSuite. So what that means is that you don't really have to work with different systems, different logins, or like middleware that may bring you like seeing issues or like different type of headaches. So before, yeah, we get into the details about the topics, the accuracy myth and the demo and so on. So I would like to now hand over to Rob to talk about Catalyst ERP. And also I will allow them to share a bit about our partnership and then how we bring this to the market. So over to you, Rob.
So, yeah, as I said, most of you hopefully will know about Catalyst, but you might not know about the wider group that we are. So, Catalyst IT Solutions Group, we've got three companies within the group. Obviously, our ERP, Oracle, NetSuite delivery side. We also have a BI side that help companies with integrating Snowflake into their companies. They're a Click reseller as well, and also Data Robot. So they're more of the data side. And we also have our own software development company as well, which is a supplier experience portal. But obviously today we're talking about NetSuite and Chartered and our ERP delivery side. Mike, if you next slide. So we've been in the NetSuite ecosystem now for 8 years, coming up to 9 years this year. We've got roughly around about 92 customers, probably about 35 to 40 now, I think 42 actually now, I think it is, where we've gone through a process of understanding requirements and implementing NetSuite. But we've also got a whole host of our own applications as well, which help supersize, if you like, NetSuite's capability. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Our NetSuite's capability. Our consultancy team has huge amounts of experience in a wide range of areas, and between them, have done roughly 500 NetSuite implementations. There's pretty much nothing they don't know about. So yeah, really good partner. But again, really excited about this partnership with Chartered. Next slide, Mike. And the reason why we chose these guys, so Catalyst, hopefully Netta's on the call here and has hopefully spoken to you about some of the innovations that we've been developing in AI with using NetSuite with dashboards and chatbots and the like. And it's really important that we partner with an SDN partner. It's really important that when you're using a third-party tool, that it sits within the NetSuite ecosystem. I can't stress that enough. Try not to go outside of the NetSuite ecosystem, because integrating those tools are really, really difficult. So it's really important that you stick within the SDN, which is the reason why we chose Chartered as our AP partner. The other reason is with our innovations in AI, we're now looking to partner with tools that are also innovating in the world of AI. Right, this is the way the world's going, so it's really important that we as a company move forward with companies that are doing the same. And a little story: we've recently had a dual customer acquisition in the form of Reho42. We came across as the best implementation partner for that specific company, and Chartered came across as the most effective and AI-driven AP solution, and it was almost like a marriage made in heaven, if you like. And together we won that customer, and that implementation has started and has already proven a great success. So that's the reason why we chose Chartered. But as I said, integrating with tools that are within the SDN network is vital to any implementation success.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. So we'll also spend more time on like being native and why we think that's the way to go. So I'm happy that you also emphasize that point as well. All right. So maybe before we show you how the solution looks like and like the other pieces in this AP efficiency, I would like to spend actually a minute on that every vendor says these days, like in the market, which is that they have the industry leading AI or maybe 99% accuracy. Because at Chartered, we think that to understand the real efficiency and the results in the AP process, I think we need to ask a little bit better questions than if the AI is embedded only, or if a solution is bringing, for example, 99% accuracy. Because even having 99% accuracy might not really be enough to really take you to the place where you really want to be from the ROI perspective. So we are now looking at, for example, industry results on the right-hand side, and like it is giving us like some averages in terms of cost and so on. So actually to really improve these results, the solution that we are working with needs to do a little bit more than just the accuracy, right? So because if every solution in the market right now has an industry-leading AI, I think we need to understand why the teams are still, for example, fixing the GL coding errors manually, and why the system doesn't really adapt to people's businesses, right? Or why someone is still like chasing approvals, like stuck in someone's inbox, and they don't really have any alternative way to really move the things forward. So we'll be looking at the topics around this today. And before we dive into that, actually to understand you a little bit better, we would like to ask you a quick question. Like, even after you implemented an AP automation solution, so what percentage of your purchase transactions, vendor bills, still require manual adjustments during this process? All right, so seems to be like a quite high results. I will say at least the percentage, like 25 to 50% of the whole invoice volume require like manual adjustments. And of course, like it's not also an easy thing maybe to track as well, but we'll be also covering this topic today towards the end, like how we can actually measure the ROI and the efficiency in our AP process. And yeah, thank you for your answers. And now to like the further talk about the accuracy myth and the invoice AI and how the AI like embeds into this process. I would like to give the mic to Mike to talk about the next slides.
Thanks, Enes. So as Enes mentioned on the last slide, we've heard this from a lot of companies in the marketplace. Some of those are our competitors. Everyone likes to talk about the 99% accuracy. And very often when that is brought up in the competitive landscape of AP automation, what they really mean by that is at maybe a character or a field extraction level. So they're trying to tell you that they're really good at identifying that an A, a B, a C is on the page, right? And they can do that 99.9% of the time. But 99% accuracy does not translate into the data always loading the way that you expect in your ERP system every single time. So that's really kind of the myth that we want to dispel here, right? When you're talking to an AP company and they throw out these really, really high accuracy rates of our product is 99% accurate, that doesn't necessarily translate into a user opening up a bill within their product and everything being populated 100% of the time, or not. Yeah, every bill being populated 100% of the time, almost every time, 99 out of 100 times. That's typically not what they mean. So it's not taking into consideration the GL account being coded correctly, the department being coded correctly, being able to capture purchase orders. So every solution out there has different ways that they're determining all of those other pieces of information that exist. They typically don't show up on your invoice directly, and there has to be additional logic and behavior that happens there. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're shopping for an AP automation solution. One thing that here at Charted that we like to encourage our customers to measure versus the accuracy rate, because that can be a little bit sticky, is moving the measure of success from character level accuracy to what we call your touchless invoice rate. So by your touchless rate, what we mean is that if you are to go into your AP automation product, you are to open up an item that you have received that is typically, we're talking about OCR scanning right here, right? If you're able to open up one of those invoices that have been received by by a vendor, do you have to make any changes before you can hit the save button, right? If there are any bills that can come in and can be processed without any additional human intervention, we would consider that as a success, right? And that is part of your overall touchless rate. Most vendors don't want to report this to you because inherently this is going to be lower than the 99% accuracy rate. There's lots of different things that go into this equation that are going to potentially affect whether something can be opened up and you can hit save immediately without having to make any other changes. To be quite honest, in the kind of, if you look at this on an industry landscape, if you focused on OCR scanning, industry leading for touchless invoice rating is around 25+%. Like if you have your system set up where 25% of the bills come in, they can be processed with no additional changes, or in some cases, they can just be created for you automatically because we know all the details. That's really industry leading. That's a really great place to at least be at as you're looking for a solution. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't ways that you can improve that even more. But you can see the difference here, right? We're going from I care about A, B's, and C's being correct on a page to how many times does an invoice come in the system that I don't have to intervene, or my EP team doesn't have to intervene, and it can be created directly without any additional changes to the solution. Just wanted to set the stage there and just kind of that's not the way that most people think about this problem. So it is a little bit of a shift, but it is an important shift as you're looking for a solution and you're thinking about ways to improve your process and you're talking with AP vendors, it's really important that you focus on how do I make sure this solution really works for me? And invoices are coming in the way that I code my invoices, not necessarily that individual characters can be identified. So a couple of ways that we help with that here at Charted. There are a couple different ways that our solution, which we call Invoice AI, is able to learn to help you get to that, touchless, improve that touchless rate. So the first thing that we're able to do in our product for learned behavior is actually by looking at historical bills. So when is when an invoice is scanned by our OCR solution, Invoice AI, we're going to extract information off that invoice. We're going to identify what the vendor is, what the subsidiary is, all of these different pieces of information, or the bill to information on the invoice might be. Then because we're a NetSuite native solution, what we're actually able to do is we're able to learn how you code your bills directly in your system based on previous bills that have been entered for that particular vendor. So let's say I have a vendor called Delta Consultants and they provide consulting services for me. It's an outside service. So I'm always coding that bill to this particular general ledger account, this department, and this classification. We're able to learn those details based on the information that you have inside of NetSuite, which is your system of truth. We don't have, again, the reason that we're able to rely on that data source is because your vendor doesn't typically tell you how those vendors, how you should code your invoice in your ERP system. The next source that we have for auto learning is actually from your user corrections. So the nice thing about Invoice AI is as you're processing invoices, you're just doing your daily job. You're actually teaching the solution. If you edit the vendor, you correct the vendor. If you update the invoice number, if you have to make a correction to the date, Invoice AI is going to essentially ask itself the question, where did you get that information? If it's able to determine where you got that information from the invoice itself, then the next time you go to process an invoice for that same vendor, it's able to learn those changes and make that edit for you automatically the next time around. The last tool that we have in our kind of toolkit here for teaching Invoice AI and helping Invoice AI learn how you should process or how you process bills, how the system should process bills for your organization is what we call AI directions. AI directions are a way that you can provide natural language prompting to handle kind of some of the edge cases that might come up from specific vendors. So for instance, let's say, and we'll look at some of these examples quickly here in our demo here in a second, but let's say there's a particular vendor that you need to capture custom pieces of information from. Maybe there's account numbers or dates that you want to extract off that invoice. That's a use case where we can actually implement an AI direction to extract that. Doesn't require a ticket, doesn't require you to be super technical, just requires you to be able to provide the instructions for how AI can determine that particular data point on the invoice itself. All of these sorts of learned behaviors that I'm talking to, another nice thing about our solution versus other solutions is they're all scoped to your environment, right? So we're talking about learned behavior for historical bills in your NetSuite instance. We're talking about your user corrections driving and making sure that invoices that are processed in the future are better for you, right? AI directions are written for your invoices in your NetSuite instance. So all of this learned behavior is scoped specifically to your business, your use cases, and how you can get as much value out of the product. At the bottom, you can see a quote from one of our customers that was able to see this in real time. As they started processing invoices, they could really see how the technology was just improving and quickly able to learn and adapt to their business. Last slide here that I'll just quickly touch on before we jump into the demo. I mentioned AI directions. Just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what AI directions might look like. Again, these are for handling edge cases, but doing them in natural language. So as opposed to having to write maybe some sort of really complex script that looks at all of this OCR data and extracts a new piece of information that's specific to your business. You could do things like, hey, I want to find this order number that is in this particular area of the invoice, or we can have directions that might translate an invoice, right? So we've seen this in the international world where you might receive an invoice in a foreign language and you want that to be translated to your language. You can easily do that through a direction and through leveraging the power of AI so that your reporting downstream stays consistent. That can be very helpful. There's a lot of different use cases for AI and how you might want to use them, but this is a helpful tool to allow the system to learn and adapt based on how your business is actually working. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my demo account and let us look at this in real time here. I would say if you have any questions as we go through the demo, there is a Q&A feature within the Zoom webinar here. Please feel free to go ahead and drop questions in the Q&A feature, and we're happy to review those at the end of our call, assuming that we have enough time. So this is our charted AP automation solution. Again, we've already talked about this. Rob mentioned it at the beginning of the call. We are a NetSuite SDN partner, so we are in the NetSuite ecosystem. We are NetSuite native. We are only focused on NetSuite as an ERP system. And we think that brings a lot of advantages to our customers, right? We understand NetSuite, we know how NetSuite works, and we're able to bring that expertise into our products. So right when I log into NetSuite, you can see that I have a nice charted dashboard or charted portlet that's on my dashboard that makes navigation very easy to get into our product. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our inbox. This is the starting point for all invoices that come into the charted Invoice AI platform. Invoices can come in two ways. So we do call it an inbox, and probably the most common way that customers are interacting and receiving invoices is through email still today. So we can have those invoices come in through email. They'll automatically be dropped into this inbox and be waiting for processing. If you do have something that you have on your computer that you need to process, we do have the option to drag and drop invoices into the top of the inbox. They will be scanned in real time and they'll be ready for processing in just a handful of seconds. So I'm actually going to do that here. Let's jump back to my demo account here. So if you have an invoice that you need to process in real time, you can easily just grab those files off of your computer here, drag it into the system. It will scan in real time and be available for processing. While that's scanning, you can see a couple different data points. So once the invoice scans, you can see things like who's the vendor that was identified, what's the subsidiary, invoice numbers, PO numbers, dates, amounts, things like that. If you are using purchase orders, we'll even show you the status of that purchase order within the inbox. So for instance, this was an invoice that I scanned that was maybe from a different demo account. That PO number that was extracted off the invoice didn't match any purchase order numbers that I have inside this instance in NetSuite. So it calls attention to that and says, hey, maybe you want to look into that in a little bit more detail. Once the invoice is scanned, you can see how quickly that scanned and is available for processing. If I want to go ahead and process this invoice, it's as easy as just clicking into that corresponding line, and that's going to take you into our split screen view. So on the left side of the screen, you're going to see the invoice that was scanned and extracted by our Invoice AI solution. And on the right side of the screen, you're actually going to see your vendor bill form. So the nice thing about being NetSuite native here is that any sort of customizations or things that have been done to your vendor bill form, like I'm going to refresh the page here. My demo account's a little bit slow here this morning for me. Anything that you've done to your NetSuite vendor bill form, like custom fields, any sort of NetSuite specific customizations that have been done to your NetSuite vendor bill form, all of those are going to be there for you. So field names that have been changed, customer or country specific customizations, right? Or specialization packages that have been installed. This is going to be your vendor bill form. So there's no need for your users to relearn a new product or relearn a new process. We're really embedding ourselves inside of that NetSuite native process. You can see that it extracted the information off of this invoice and went ahead and pre-populated it onto my vendor bill form here for me. This is where we can talk a little bit about some of the learned behavior that we have. So we can see that it, for instance, it extracted the vendor name. It was able to associate that with a vendor inside of the system. It extracted the invoice date and populated the invoice date information. It selected the subsidiary for me based on who it saw this was invoiced to. At the line level here, it was able to bring in those lines that were on the invoice, but we can see it went ahead and coded this invoice. So it filled in an account, a department, and a location. This goes back to that learned behavior that I talked about based on historical bills. So it actually looked into the system and it said for this Bright Edge Services vendor, when the Charted Inc. subsidiary has been invoiced in the past for these sorts of cleaning up services, this is how they've been coded, right? So it's not relying on some sort of like default setting. It's looking historically inside of the system and saying, this is how this type of invoice has been processed. That information doesn't exist. My vendor didn't tell me how to code the invoice. So let me go ahead and make some or learn how I should code this invoice, much like what your AP team would do, right? That's what years of experience being an AP professional tells you. This sort of invoice for this type of vendor, this is how I would code it. We're just helping the system do that a little bit more efficiently. Second type of learning that we can talk about is based on user changes. So I'm going to illustrate just this as an example on this invoice. Let's say for whatever reason, when I enter this invoice, I want to always capture this incident number as the invoice number. Maybe that's how we want it for downstream reporting. So all I have to do is actually just make that change, right? So let's say I want to change the invoice number to that 80041 number that I see on the invoice itself. I don't have to click on that on the invoice itself. I just need to make the change, make the correction that I would expect in the system, and then I can go ahead and save that. What Invoice AI is going to try to do when it's saving this invoice is it's going to try to teach itself, where did that user find that value on the invoice? If it can do that, it's going to go ahead and the next time I scan an invoice for Bright Edge Services, we'll try to pick up that data point so I don't have to make the correction again. So this works really well for some of the key pieces of information that we're extracting off of the invoice. So those are things like we can auto learn like dates, the invoice amounts, the invoice numbers, even vendors, right, are learned over time. So those are all those sorts of learned behaviors that we've built into the system. So you don't have to continue to make those same changes over and over and over again. So if I go back to the invoice inbox here, and then I scan my second invoice for Bright Edge Services, let that come into the system, we should see that it's now going to try to pick up that other number, that incident number as the invoice number, so I don't have to make the correction. Something else that's nice about our inbox while we're just letting that finish up scanning here, we do have the ability to filter items within the inbox. So if you are a team that is larger and you're gonna have multiple people that are responsible for processing invoices within the inbox, you can easily just filter down to what you're responsible for. So I can say, hey, these are the invoices that I'm responsible for, that I'm assigned to as the what we call owner. So think of that as the AP professional that's responsible for processing them. It's an easy way to keep things organized on larger teams if you have them. I'm going to go ahead and click into the second item here within that I just scanned, right? That second rescan of a Bright Edge Services invoice. And we should see that incident number, different incident number, but it was able to learn, okay, that's what I'm trying to pick up. That's what I want as the invoice number for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and learn from that user's changes, learn from that correction, and implement that for them the next time. So those are the first two levels of learning that we talked about in our slides. Just wanted to highlight the last one that we'll jump back to the inbox here and highlight is an AI direction. So I have this other example here for a vendor, Delta Consultants. And on this invoice itself, we can see that I have these service periods, right? So the vendor is telling me for these particular lines, these are the dates that those services correspond to. That information might be important to me for a number of different reasons. Maybe these are services that stretch over a long period of time. In this example, they don't across multiple periods. They're broken out, but maybe they do. And maybe that's something I want to tie into standard NetSuite amortization functionality. And I want to amortize that over a number of months. So having those dates captured is important to me. I might not want to have to capture those dates every single time and enter them into the corresponding fields. That's a little bit farther from kind of a standard field uh, that Invoice AI is going to try to learn over time, but we can still help with getting those pieces of information off that are specific to your business and specific to your particular use case through something that we call an AI direction, right? So we can actually see that I did set up an AI direction, and I'll show it to you here in just a second, that was able to capture those dates that it found on the line level of the invoice here and map those. I just had it mapped to the standard NetSuite start and end date fields that again could drive amortization or something like that. But all I did to make that happen, I didn't have to write some sort of complex script or anything like that. All I did is this is controlled through permissions, so you can control, NetSuite administrators or super users that might be responsible for administering and creating these, but they have the ability to set up these AI directions to what we call set up custom extraction directions, right? So what do I want to get off the invoice that's maybe unique to my particular business? I wanted it to get this start date and this end date column off of the invoice. These directions are triggered by certain words that we might see on the invoice itself. So you have the ability to scope these. They don't have to apply across the board. You can sometimes, I made this one a little bit more broad. It's just looking for the word service period anywhere on the invoice. Sometimes you might want to make these a little bit more explicit to a particular vendor that you're working with. But the direction itself is very simple. It's very plain. In this case, it's in, plain English, or other languages are supported as well. It doesn't just have to be English. But you can see how I just told it to look for the beginning service period date that was found on each line. AI directions can kind of pick up on relative positioning. So I could tell it to look under a particular heading. I could tell it to look after a particular keyword, things like that. But AI directions are really powerful, a very powerful tool for getting additional data off of the invoice that's important to you and to your business. So that's just another quick use case. And again, highlighting the downstream effects of this. This is a really cool thing to talk about and a really cool use of AI. But when you look at the entire picture, like what Rob was talking about being in the NetSuite ecosystem being important, being NetSuite native being important, using AI being important, but how do we make that important to your business, right? How do we turn that into delivering value for your business? Because we're NetSuite native, because these tools are being mapped into NetSuite native fields, now it can drive downstream reports, right? So if let's say you don't care about this for amortization, or it's a different data point, but you want to be able to run save searches on the different time periods that Delta Consultants has been invoicing you for and how those expenses have been incurred into different periods. Now we can quickly and easily inside of NetSuite, just through a save search, start building transaction level reports and be able to drive those additional insights and those additional decision making that my business needs. But a lot of that process starts at the bill entry part, right? So if your AP team is bogged down, they're not able to get this extra information into the system because the volume is really high and the data entry is very cumbersome. They're not going to be able to drive that downstream business impact and effect for your organization. So those are just a couple of ways, again, going back to the slides, that we're able to help with making the system feel smarter, helping the system learn from your changes and adapt to your particular business. Got to wrap up here, so we won't have time to talk about all of our other features, but our automation doesn't just stop there. So we do have an end-to-end AP automation suite, and it's talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the slide. Everything from some stuff before this, right, like helping you onboard your vendors more efficiently, to approvals. We do have a very robust approval automation engine that can even help with some of the tasks we talked about, where invoices come into the system. You maybe submit them for approval, but approvers aren't approving in a very quick and robust fashion. So we have ways that we can make sure, number one, this gets routed to the correct approver. So you're not having to determine the correct approver. We can set up approval matrices that can decide, okay, because this is coded to maybe this subsidiary and maybe a particular department, I know that I need to route it to this particular user. So we can build all that into the solution so that the AP team isn't having to remember and figure out who needs to approve different types of invoices. We can also remind those approvers, make sure that if they forget to approve every 2, 3, 5 days, whatever you want to do, they receive that reminder follow-up and you don't have to go chase them down. We include all of the approval history right on the record here, so you have visibility into that, into your approval process. We also provide approval emails. So an email is going to be sent out to your different approvers. It's going to look something like this, letting them know that they have something pending their approval, gives them an attachment so they have that PDF to review right within their inbox. They don't actually need access to NetSuite. They can easily just approve or reject this email, this invoice directly from their email without ever having to go into the system or require a license to um, rec record that approval in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the demo there because I know we have a few more slides to get through. Let's go ahead and jump back over here and turn it over to Ennis and Rob to wrap up.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That was really really interesting. So I've got a few questions actually, just to sort of drive some of these key takeaways. And as Mike said, if anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A chat. Just going on to the sort of the touchless element, how would you define and measure sort of touchless rate in the real world?
Yeah, it's a good question. We touched on this a little bit in the slides, but how we define touchless is there an invoice that comes into the system, your AP team, I hate to say it this way, but doesn't have to add any value to the process because the system already got everything correctly. So the vendor's coded correctly, um, the invoice is coded to the correct department. All of the information is populated in the way that you expect. So AP at that point, is just clicking the save button. That's how we've defined touchless here at Charted. And those type of invoices, again, we don't see a user needing to add a lot of value to the process because the system already got everything correctly. So you didn't need to make any other touches. We have some metrics that we can track, and our customers can actually write reports on to say, all right, these are the invoices that came in. All the user did on the bill was click the save button. So maybe we should look at ways of we have some what we call auto creation functionality that going forward, AP is not really adding any value into that process. These bills are being received and going into the system without you needing to make any corrections. So let's go ahead and create those automatically for your organization so that you can focus on the others, right? And we still realize that AP professionals are very valuable to the process. There are intricacies, there are complex invoices that are going to come up that you do need to get into the system, and you do need to uh, add, some additional coding or things like that. But those invoices that are coming in very consistently, the system's always getting correct. You're not making any changes and you're just hitting the save button. That's how we would define touchless. And that's what we would encourage our customers to look at ways to turn on some functionality to auto create those bills and save your time for the more complex bills.
Nice. Okay. How going on to the AI side of stuff here, how quickly does the system improve and learn after go live?
Yeah, I think we had a quote from one of our customers there. I mean, technically, every save that you make is going to be helping the system learn, and that's another advantage of our solution being NetSuite native. We do have the ability to learn from historical data even before you implemented our solution. So that historical learning of how you code your invoices, right? That's done inside of NetSuite. So we're able to look at previous bills that have been entered for Delta consultants before you even started with Charted, and learn, say, hey, this is how those bills should be coded. But in general, I would say, a lot of people will see the I like to tell people give the system your typical AP cycle, right? To learn all of the different intricacies that you might have um, in your particular business. So the salesy answer is, hey, every single time you make a save, you're going to be teaching the system, but that save, if you don't see that bill for another 30 days because you're only invoiced once a month for a particular vendor, then you might not see the benefit of that save for another 30 days. So I typically tell people, if your AP cycle is typically very monthly, right? All of your invoices are received within the matter of a month. Give it that amount of time just to learn all of those intricacies, and you can typically see a dramatic improvement on the first time it received the invoice. This is the way it looked versus the next time it received the invoice the next month. This is how it looked.
Cool. Just two more questions then for myself. What does a successful rollout require from the customer side?
Yeah, I think I can take that one, Rob. So I will say that there are like three things that are the most important one. And first thing is that the clean vendor master data. And usually people maybe realize that they don't really have like a structured vendor data that has like enough information for the tools that the process until they really go into UAT. But I think the first thing is really important is to have a clean master data. And then also spending time in the beginning of the project in the implementation with the finance decision makers are also very crucial so that we can see the real impact and the efficiency once we plug in the application inside their account from day one so that we don't really have to do a lot of like rewrites and so on inside the system. And I will say I saved the most important thing to the last, in my opinion, which is the UAT. I think we really need to protect the time of the users that will purely spend on testing the application. And I don't really talk about here the testing app like functionally inside their NetSuite account, but really to understand their edge cases, their different layouts, different complexities from different invoices that they receive every month that I think it will help the project to be live in a much more healthier manner.
Great. Thank you. And then one final question. Obviously, we've got a number of NetSuite customers on the call here today. If they're looking at investing in Chartered, what how should they be thinking about the ROI? What sort of metrics should they be really considering?
Yeah, that's also a great question. Like when we always talk about actually the ROI, everybody, of course, inclined to just like think about the cost, and that's definitely something that we also need to consider and try to get a return from our AP investment. So I will say this is still the first thing that they need to start with identifying first the current cost per invoice to begin with, and then to maybe look at what their team is actually doing today. Like if they're, for example, spending lots of times like chasing approvals, right? Correcting and touching each and every invoice, doing manual adjustments on classifications or GL codes and so on, or maybe, looking at different systems and try to understand like, I don't know, if the lines are matching between the systems or the transactions and so on. And to understand how much they actually spend on each and every invoice because yes, the ROI is oftentimes about the cost, but isn't really always only the real cost saving on dollars, but is the hours that they save from their everyday work so that they can take that hour and then spend it on a more meaningful work as well.
Yeah. Right. And is there anything you guys would just want to sort of just highlight again about the need for staying native and the risks associated to non-NetSuite native applications?
Yeah. I think I can talk about it like towards like just the end, so we can maybe like quickly summarize our like key takeaways here from today as well. So I think the first thing is the measuring what really matters. It's not really only about the accuracy, how our data is correctly populated, but how our basically system also kind of gets smarter each and every time and learns and adapts to our business. So we need to measure on the touchless processing rate, more importantly, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the system creates these records, but how many times that I really need to touch it on different data points. Then we also, yeah, need to demand an AI that really learns and adapts to our business. And also we need to have some alternatives when things goes off, because we, in the end of the day, like, yeah, oftentimes see like complex layouts, we work with OCR technology, but we need to have an ability to actually fix those, to improve those with some built-in features. So we don't really rely on external teams to train our layouts, right? To just optimize to have an optimized system behavior. And yeah, the staying native is, we are a big advocate of this, like obviously, because we believe that like the one system and having one source of truth is important to also get the best experience and enhance the experience from NetSuite itself. So we don't really have to worry about, separate login, a different system again to learn for our team and to deal with these like integration overheads, etc.
Excellent. I'm sure
All right.
we haven't got any questions. So I think that probably that's our time as well. So guys, thank you again for your time, Mike. Great demonstration. Thank you for everyone for joining the webinar today. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact Chartered directly or Netta, who's your account manager if you're a Catalyst customer. Alternatively, Netta will probably be reaching out to you in the next day or two. And yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.